So for this drawing video, I was working with two robotic characters, so it was going to be easier to combine these two ideas. So right off the bat, I went into the planning phase, which you can see some smudges from a project that was bleeding through. Whoops. But I wanted to integrate the damage of the leg and a couple other smaller details into the overall design. And man, that sketch sheet looks terrible. But for those of you who don't know, over the last probably year and a half, I've been taking old action figures from my childhood, and I've been combining them with Go-Go's figurines and sort of trying to transcend these childhood characters in case anything ever happens to them. Because when you're growing up, when it comes to these action figures, at least for me, you sort of create these personalities and these characters for your action figures, and they sort of take on their own sort of personalities and roles when you have all your action figures together. This guy, I don't remember ever giving him a name. It's I think he's a knockoff Transformers action figure. But he always looked very leaderly to me. His face sort of looks like a pharaoh. Like, the way it's structured, it's very angular. It looks very wise, and I wanted to incorporate that into the overall design. Here, very soon, I'm about to realize that I don't like the leg position of the undamaged leg, because it doesn't make any sense if there's a damaged leg and he's just standing on one. I realize that hopefully soon, and I probably will erase that any second now. There we go. I realized I wanted to have him floating because I felt that made more sense since one of his legs is busted. So I sort of just tilted both legs in. But yeah, overall, this design was fairly simple. If you can see some of what I put on that pen sketch sheet, I'm pretty much copying one for one, and then just adding a couple simple details. I always struggled with robotics. I think I mentioned that in the last video, like drawing metal pieces that make sense were always difficult. And now that the pencil sketching process is done, I move on to inking. And I mentioned this in the last video. It took me a while to find ink pens that actually interacted properly with the sort of watercolor paper that I'm using. I tried using my Papermates that I use for colored pencil drawings, and it didn't matter if you waited 5 minutes or 30 minutes after the drawing, it would always smudge and smear. But luckily these ones didn't. I think these are microns, or some form of micron. But yeah, experiment around with different materials. I'm also like hunching way over this shot. I was working with a much smaller tripod this video, so you're gonna be seeing lots of the top of my head probably. But yeah, I wanted to incorporate some aspects from the smaller robot, the Go-Go. There was like a cylinder, there's a fan, almost like a rotating blade or a turbine for the mouth of the Go-Go, and I wanted to incorporate that into the chest as sort of just a cool little added piece. And then there was also kind of this weird split dot design that I added to that upper left shoulder that I'll color in a little bit later. But as with all these other action figures of mine that have sustained damage over the years, I really did want to incorporate that into their finished design, because I think that's what really helped make them stand out in my mind. Like, they were different, and they were more mine that way because of the damage that they sustained. And I won't even say that they were all my fault. I've mentioned this before. It was not my fault, but, you know, it made the characters even more interesting. So here I move on to watercolors, and this is still a very new process for me. Mixing colors and figuring out how much of the watercolors to use. I still struggle with that. And a couple times there, you'll see me, it kind of looks weird, sped up. But basically what I'm doing is I'm dipping my fingers in a glass of water, and then I'm just letting it drip into the palette. instead of having to constantly pick it up with the brush. It doesn't really matter how I get the water in there, but if I think it's too thick, I'll just put a little bit more water in there. And for this drawing, I was working with a very simple color palette. It was a little bit harder mixing this blue because in the action figure, it's a little bit more metallic, and that was much more difficult to get across. It's also just a weirder color. It's like a very dark teal, and I did not mix the colors very well, and I think I realized that here in a second, and I try to go back and sort of darken it, because at this point, it's like a very light royal blue. So at this point, I think I'm trying to like figure out, is this color even gonna work? So I tried darkening it as best I could. Watercolor in general is very fascinating. I really like the texture that it gives. It's very, very different looking than colored pencil. When I first started into watercolors, I thought, oh, well, these are basically the same. But the more I use watercolors, the more I realized just how different they are. And I wouldn't say I like them better than colored pencils, but I wouldn't say I like colored pencils better either. I think they both have their pros and cons, and I did a character just the other day where it was essentially a one-shot. I just did a pencil sketch on a piece of paper, and I made a character real fast, used color pencils, and I was utterly shocked at how fast I was able to make a finished piece, because I've been working with watercolor so much this year that whole process is so much longer and more complicated. I have to get out a bunch of supplies, I have to find a good surface, I have to find good lighting, and it's just way more involved than using colored pencils. I'm also trying my best in this watercolor to add little sort of areas where I don't carry the color all the way through to the edges, to sort of add a natural shimmer as though it is metallic. Obviously, if I was going super try-hard mode, I would have really put a bunch of like reflective surfaces on, or planned out patches that I would just leave white. But I gotta be honest, I wasn't in the mood for that. I wanted to do it relatively simple. I went with an overall a very simple color palette. I was not working super complex. I knew which colors I wanted this character to have, and I mean, that's something that, looking back on my older drawings, I realized just how much I struggled with. There are some older drawings from probably 5 or 6 years ago where it is just unbelievable the sheer number of colors I tried to fit into just one drawing, where the aesthetic is just all wrong. And here, the wires that I used for the leg, I had to go back and redo that red because it dried really dull and I didn't like it. So wrapping up the watercolor section, I just started adding shading, trying to find areas where darkness would sort of be hidden up underneath, and get that lighting in coming down from the upper right down and to the left. So we're adding shading wherever I can, or wherever I think to. You may also notice I added some little floaty levitation circles underneath him, which I thought was really neat. It gave a cooler effect, very much more what I wanted overall in the piece. And without further ado, here's the finished product. Overall, I was very happy with how this piece turned out. You can see I added a couple more touches. I added a lot of battle damage to it because I really wanted to lean into that motif of the damage, because I really liked that. And overall, I just thought it made him look cooler, and so that's what I decided to do. So thank you guys so much for watching, and yeah, that's it for this drawing video. Bye.